Good morning. It's a
Good
pleasure to be
morning.
with you and to engage with Psalm number 7. This psalm is really interesting to me because I could not find, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, but I could not find any verses or parts of verses from this psalm in our Jewish liturgy. So Psalm 7. So, the first 5 Psalms all had some connection to Jewish liturgy. And then Psalm 6, the whole Psalm was in our prayer service. And we talked about that last week. But Psalm 7, as far as I can tell, there's nothing from this Psalm in our liturgy. And I guess what fascinates me about that is two things. One is Psalms that have no connection to our liturgy are much less familiar. Well, at least to me, but probably also to other people. That is, it's hard to like when I read through a psalm, I usually recognize some of it. And this psalm, I felt very distant from in some ways. So I look forward to engaging with you in it. I was able to find some interesting commentaries, and there is some interesting, there are some interesting aspects of this psalm. It's not an uninteresting psalm, but it is really interesting that it isn't in our liturgy, even in part. So we'll start as we usually start, with reading the psalm out loud in Hebrew, which I think helps us to get into the mood and to feel the sound of the psalm. So Psalm 7. Oh, it's also the longest psalm that we've done so far. All right. Shigayon leDavid, asher shar l'Adonai al divrei chush ben yamini. Adonai Elohai becha chasiti, hoshieni mikol rodfai v'hatzileni. Pen yitrof ka'aryeh nafshi, horek ve'ein matzil. Adonai Elohai, im asiti zot, im yesh avel bechapai, im gamalti sholmi ra, va'achaltza tzori rekam, yirdof oyev nafshi v'yaseg, v'yirmos la'aretz chayai, uchvodi le'afar yashken, Selah. Kuma Adonai be'apecha, hinase be'avrot tzorai, ve'ura elai mishpat tzivita. Va'adat le'umim tisovaveka, ve'alecha larmarom shuva. Adonai yadin amim, shofteni Adonai ketzidki, uchtumi alai. Yigmorna ra rishaim. Utchonen tzadik, uvochen libot uchlayot, Elohim tzadik. Magini al Elohim, Moshia yishrei lev. Elohim shofet tzadik, ve'el zo'em bechol yom. Im lo yashuv charbo yiltosh, kashto darach v'yechonaneha, ve'lo hechin klei mavet, chitzav ledolkim mifal. Hine yichabel aven v'hara amal v'yalad shaker. Bor kara v'yach perehu v'yipol b'shachat yifal. Yashuv amalo b'rosho ve'al kodkodo chamaso yired. Odeh Adonai ketzidko v'azamra shem Adonai elyon. So one thing that is true about this psalm is there are some parts of it that feel very familiar to me from sort of general secular culture. That is to say, I wonder if some phrases that we sometimes say, like that you're digging yourself a pit that you might fall into, right? Like you're digging your own grave, that kind of phrase, like feels like it comes from this psalm. I mean, not that maybe the psalm was necessarily the origination of it, but oftentimes in our English idiom, certain phrases come to us from biblical texts, and we don't even realize that it's coming from that. So it's possible that phrase, one of these ideas of digging your own, I should stop talking while I'm digging my own pit here, right? Like that phrase is in this psalm. And so I wonder if it's from if that's where that comes from. All right, so yeah, we're gonna, of course, read some of our translations, but before we do, does anybody have any thoughts or comments about the psalm as a whole? Mishka, you have to unmute. Yeah, we can't hear you because you're not unmuted. You have to unmute.
Sorry. I'm looking at two things. One, I'm looking at the translation in the art scroll, and certainly it does say about digging a pit. And that's word for word.
Yeah, that's in the psalm.
Right.
I wasn't making that up.
No, I understand that, and I could see why that particular thing turns into can be in our common language. I just want to make a different comment. I have, among other translations here, Reb Zalman Schachter's translations of the Psalms, or his thinking about the Psalms. You can see there. He does not put in Psalm 7. It is decidedly missing.
Well, it's possible that he really focused on that. Reb Zalman's focus was on Psalms that are prevalent in Jewish liturgy, or Psalms that Jews know. And this psalm is not one of those.
Yeah,
it is a skipped over psalm. It's interesting, right? Like some psalms are not in Jewish liturgy, but are recommended, for example, to read at certain times of life. Like there are lists of psalms that are good for healing, or psalms that are good for frustration, or psalms that are right. You can access these lists, and Jews and non-Jews have made lists of, read these psalms for this emotional experience. Psalm 7 not on those lists.
right. And so it's interesting that it's not in the book. Just left it out. We go from 6 to 8.
Right. And what we'll see in 2 weeks, not next week because I have jury duty, but in 2 weeks, we'll see that Psalm 8 does have liturgical connections, and and Psalm 6, of course, did, but Psalm 7, no. But in spite of it not having liturgical connections, there are some aspects of it which might lead us to some meaning. So I wanted to look at the difficulty in tense in verses 12, 13, 14, but really 13 and 14. It's not clear at all who is being referred to in the psalm. It could be the evil person, or it could be God. And if you read it as it's about the evil person, then the fact that the person is readying their bow and arrow to do evil is very sinister. And if you read it that it's referring to God, then God is arming God's self for retribution against the wicked. And how you translate those words makes a complete difference in how the psalm is understood. So let's look at examples of that. We're gonna go, this is also this is from the Chabad. It's an Art Scroll translation from a Chabad rabbi named Yosef Marcus. And it's on the left-hand side here. Kathy, would you like to read?
Sure. A Shigayon by David, which he sang to God concerning Cush the Benjaminite. I put my trust in you, God, my God, deliver me from all my pursuers and save me, lest he tear my soul like a lion, crushing me with none to rescue. God, my God, if I have done this to others, that which was done to me, if there is any wrongdoing in my hands, if I have rewarded my friends with evil or oppressed those who hate me without reason, then let the enemy pursue my soul and overtake it. Let him trample my life to the ground and lay my glory, my kingship in the dust forever. Arise, O God, in your anger. Lift yourself up on fury against my foes. Stir me to mete out the retribution that you commanded. When the assembly of nations surrounds you to ask for your help, remove yourself from it and return to the heavens. God will mete out retribution upon the nations. Judge me, O God, according to my righteousness and my integrity. May the wickedness of the wicked come to an end, but establish the righteous, O righteous God, searcher of hearts and minds.
Keeps going.
Go on. Oh, okay.
Yep.
Oh, go on. I rely on God to be my shield, for he saves the upright of heart. God is a righteous judge, and the Almighty is angered every day by the deeds of the wicked. When the wicked one does not repent, he sharpens his sword, bends his bow, and makes it ready. But it is for himself that he has prepared instruments of death. His arrows will be used on the pursuers of the righteous, that is himself. Behold, he conceives iniquity, is pregnant with evil schemes, and gives birth to falsehood. He digs a pit, digs it deep, only to fall into the trap he laid. His mischief will return upon his own head. His violence will come down upon his own skull. I will then praise God in accordance with his righteousness and sing to the name of God Most High.
All right. So here, the italics is words that don't appear in the Hebrew, but that the translator felt like you needed to have to be able to really understand this psalm. And right. And so, for example, at the top where it says, that is Saul, right? That is responding to a tradition that Cush, the Benjaminite, is actually the King Saul, that this was a poem written about David's relationship with Saul. And we're gonna look at a couple of comments that explicate that in the Jewish tradition. But here you can see that in 13 and 14, who is sharpening the sword?
The wicked one.
The wicked, right? Okay, so the wicked one is sharpening the sword and preparing the arrows, but it turns out that they're going to actually end up being used on himself, right? Okay, but that isn't the only way to read this psalm. You can also read it where the person who is doing the sharpening is God. So let's look at this is another Orthodox Jewish translation from the Koren Tehillim. Lori, would you like to read? You have to unmute.
Trying to find it so I could read it from the paper, but it's okay.
Yeah, it's on pages 8 and 9 on the left-hand side.
Okay. All right, a Shiggaion of David, which he sang to the Lord concerning Cush, a Benjaminite. Lord my God, in you I seek refuge. Rescue me from all my pursuers and save me, lest, like a lion, they tear me apart and rip me to pieces with none to rescue. Lord my God, if I had done these things, if there is any guilt on my hand, at peace with me, I who delivered him, who without cause was my enemy. Then let an enemy pursue and overtake me. Let him trample my life to the ground and lay my honor in the dust. Selah. Arise, Lord, in your anger. Rouse yourself in fury against my foes. Bestir yourself on my behalf. Pronounce judgment. Let the peoples assemble around you. The Lord judges the peoples. Judge me, Lord, according to my righteousness and according to my integrity. Let the evil of the wicked come to an end, but establish the righteous. You searcher of the mind and heart, you righteous God. I rely on God, who is my shield. He saves the upright in heart. God is a just judge. Every day he is indignant. Not repent, God will sharpen his sword. He will bend his bow and take aim. He has prepared for him his deadly weapons. He has made ready his arrows for the pursuers of the righteous. See how the wicked conceives evil, is pregnant with mischief, and gives birth to lies. He digs a pit and digs it deep, but he himself will fall into a hole he has made. His mischief will recoil upon his own head. His violence will come down upon his own skull. I will praise the Lord for his righteousness and sing psalms to the name of the Lord Most High.
All right, so what does it do for you to think about these two approaches? That it could be that the psalmist is talking about the wicked person who is preparing these violent instruments, or it could be that the psalmist thinks that God is preparing instruments of retribution against the wicked. What do you think?
What do I think?
Yeah, I mean,
Oh,
what,
okay.
what is it? What is everybody like?
Oh.
Which feels like it's more true to the sense of the whole psalm? Which feels like what do you think the answer is? Alba.
Hey, sorry I got in here late. I'm ending my day. You guys are beginning your day. It sounds a lot like in Esther where it says he hung himself on his own gallows. You know how Haman ended up hanging himself on a gallows of his own making. And each of the different alliterations here seems to be you're the author of your own end. And you know, God doesn't really have to do anything to you. You're perfectly capable of being a total jerk and paying for the price with your own hands.
Great. So Alba looks at the next couple verses, right? That are very clearly, the wicked person is digging a pit and then gonna fall into the pit of his own making.
Mhm.
And that, you know, if we read that backward, it seems like the verses about the arrows and the swords, right, are also the wicked person is making them, but is going to then be impaled on them himself, not that God is readying the bow to take out the wicked. Does anybody want to speak to the other possibility that that is in fact God who is doing the sharpening? Kathy.
Well, if we look at the psalm as a psalm of hope, and which we've seen that sometimes the tone changes from supplication to hope and a more positive ending, then we see that the psalmist is saying, I know God is gonna come through for me and do this for me. But it's curious to me, why is there such confusion? I don't understand Hebrew enough to be able to see what one line says versus the other, because then his is capitalized in the English translation, meaning God's, but I don't understand why it's so confusing when it's read in Hebrew.
It's confusing because exactly what you just said. Do we write so we know that it says his sword, but do we write it with a capital H or a lowercase h? Right? Like we have, we do have, you know, like the Hebrew has, it's like we have the pronoun, but we don't have an antecedent to the pronoun. We don't know who it's referring to when it says his.
And in Hebrew, there's no capitalization versus small letter.
Right. Hebrew does not tell us as readily which, like, oh yes, this is his referring to God, or this is his referring to the wicked one. There are two antecedents that are possible, and the translators do the best they can. Now, I wanted to pull on a thread of what you said. You talked about the psalm being maybe a psalm of hope, but I think, you know, one thing that I heard with what you said is, if you look at the verses before this, but like before this moment, where, you know, where it says God right in verse 12, God exacts justice for the righteous, and in verse 10, right, God is the one who is putting an end to the evilness of the wicked, and in verse 7, we're asking God to rise up in anger and have wrath against the wicked. And so if you read the first part of the psalm and then you get to those verses, you can sort of understand how it might be that we're in fact saying, yeah, this is God who is readying God's instruments of vengeance against the wicked. But so it's sort of like, do you read the psalm forward or backward? Right? Alba pointed to the verses at the end of the psalm and said, no, we see here a pattern where the wicked people are going to be impaled on their own instruments of violence, right? They're going to fall into their own pit. They're going to be hung on their own gallows, right? So it must be that it's the wicked's instruments of war. But if you start from the beginning of the psalm, you might get this sense that the major actor in the psalm against the wicked is God, and so it must be God's bow and God's arrows. And I think, right, I think that's, in translation of Psalms, that's a huge part of the tension here, is how do you capture the sense of the whole psalm? All right, so Mishka is going to also comment on this, and then we're going to move to another topic.
One of the things that strikes me, and again, I'm right here looking at the Art Scroll translation, is that the tense changes as the psalm goes on. Again, this is this translation, which talks in places, God please do, and in other places, God has done. And then the third is, please God, do for me. That just kind of confuses me in some ways. I don't know whether that's a translation or it's the way the Hebrew reads.
It's the way the Hebrew reads.
Okay.
The Hebrew itself shifts tenses, and it's actually a perfect segue to what I wanted to talk about next, which is sorry, Mishka, I cut you off.
A different idea. This particular psalm, because it does mention Saul as the enemy, is a historical bit too, and there's where the tense piece comes to mind as well. He's talking about, it seems to me, he's talking about the issue of Saul being king, and especially when it talks about he will sharpen his sword. I think about the fact that Saul, if I'm right, kills himself by falling on his sword.
Mhm.
So that just sort of comes to mind that this is something, did he write the psalm before or during or after?
Well,
his
I just want to be
encounter?
clear that the psalm actually says nothing about Saul at all.
Well, it seems that the uh, the translator uses the idea of Saul.
Right. Correct. But there is not, that's why I wanted to be clear. The psalm itself has no reference to Saul directly. The Jewish tradition understands who is this Cush, the Benjaminite, right? The most famous Benjaminite is Saul, so it must be Saul, right? So we're going to look at that passage in the Talmud that I brought for us. So one possible way to understand this poem is indeed that it relates to Saul, but that is not necessarily the case in the context of the psalm itself. However, I love your connection right there. Like, it's not just this question of the Benjaminite, the superscription to the psalm, but also the content of the psalm leads us to think, oh, maybe this has something to do with David's relationship with Saul, and we're going to look at that a little bit more too. I do want to say that it is very common in biblical poetry, especially in the Psalms, to shift back and forth from the third person talking about God to the second person talking to God, and even sometimes to switch into the first person, either on behalf of the poet, right? I will sing, right? Like it does here in the last verse. I will praise God for God's righteousness, right? Odeh Adonai Kitzidko, right? That's coming into the first person, or to be a quote, putting first person words into the mouth of God, right? And biblical poetry is that is very common approach in biblical poetry, and we do see it in this psalm where the tenses do shift from second person and to third person and back to second person and then finally to first person in the end. And I think that's that also first person at the very beginning, right? God should deliver me from my enemies. So I do think that's very common. Yeah, Kathy.
I have read English poetry where if you read it from the first line down, it means one thing. And if you read it inverted from the bottom line as the first line, it really changes the entire meaning. And I mean, what comes to my mind is that maybe David, being the great psalmist he was deliberately, this was like a poetic device that he put these things in so that it even opened up more what the meanings could be.
Great. Yeah, and I do want to say, with regard to the historicity of these Psalms. Remember, we talked about how Psalms 3 and 4 and 5 very much felt like they were like of a piece, and that they were directly connected to this moment where David was fleeing from his son, right? And especially in Psalm 3, it was like right before he went to bed that night when he ran away from Jerusalem. And in Psalm 4, when he woke up the next morning and his emotions had shifted, right? In Psalm 6, we saw that it was really probably from a different point in David's life, maybe when David was at the very end of his life, or when David suffered a great sickness, right? But then, whenever David or whoever the psalmist wrote, whoever it was who wrote that, whenever in that person's life they wrote it, it has been taken into this section of the book of Psalms that is connected to this sort of the historical figure of David and these moments in his life. and specifically in his fighting off enemies, specifically the enemy of his son. But in Psalm 7, we see, at least through the eyes of tradition, that this psalm actually takes place in David's life before he becomes king, or before he's fully accepted as king, because he's striving with Saul, or with supporters of Saul, and he is and then he's not sure who to trust, because he does not know who are his true supporters and who are Saul's true supporters, who just happen to be going along with the prevailing winds of the times and have accepted David, but not truly accepted David. And it feels like there's enemies all around him, right? What unifies these Psalms is David's sense of the enemies around him. But it's clear that this psalm comes from a different point in David's life, if in fact we can say that any of the Psalms are actually historically connected to David's life. But certainly that's how the book of Psalms is presenting it in this case. All right, so I wanted to talk about the shift in tone that a couple people have referenced, and there is a very strong shift in tone at the word Selah. So we had talked about the word Selah being used we had talked about the word Selah being used as a musical notation, that the word Selah says, okay, now we're going to pause for the musical accompaniment or the musical interlude. But another way to think about the word Selah is that it cues us into emotional shifts in the psalm. And I think there's a big one at this Selah. So let's read the translation by Rabbi Richard Levy, the Reformed Jewish translator of the psalm, and that you can find on page 6, also on the left. And Edith, would you like to read for us? Oh, Edith, if you're reading, yeah.
Okay. A passionate song by David, which he sang to Adonai about the words of Cush of Benjamin. Adonai, my God, in you have I taken refuge. Deliver me from all my pursuers and save me, lest they turn me into carrion for a lion, tearing me into pieces with no rescuer in sight. Adonai, my God, if I am responsible for this, if there's any wrongdoing on my hands, if I have responded hurtfully when someone was wholeheartedly with me, if I have stripped my adversaries to the bone, then let an enemy chase me, catch me, trample my life into the ground. Let him case my honor down to sleep in the dust. Selah. But if I am innocent, then arise, Adonai, in your wrath. Raise yourself against the arrogance of my enemies. Awaken for me the judgment you commanded. Array the council of nations around you. Return on high, ruling over them. Adonai judges peoples, bringing me to judgment. Adonai. In accordance with my just actions and the integrity that rules me, let the wickedness of the wicked cease. Oh, secure the place of the just. The one who probes hearts and innards is God the just. The shield I wear is the shield of God, who brings victory to the upright of heart. God is a just judge, a God indignant every day. If none turns back, God whets the sword. The bow is bent and God takes aim. You have prepared deadly weapons against them. You have made your arrow sharp as fire. Here one writhes in wrongdoing, conceives in mischief, gives birth to deceit. Another dug a pit, gouged it out, then tumbled into the crater he created. This one's mischief will turn back upon his head. His violence will rain down upon his skull. I, though, will give thanks to Adonai. Your justice merits. Let me sing out the name of Adonai Most High.
What do you feel thinking specifically about the tone shift at the end of verse 6 after the word Selah? Like, is there do you feel an emotional shift in the psalm at that point? Yeah, right. The first half or the first 6 verses or whatever of the psalm seem very much to be about this fear of, or self-doubt, right? The fear of having done something wrong. If I have wronged anyone, that would be bad. Please let it not be that I have wronged anyone who didn't deserve it, you know? It's okay to wrong the people who had it coming to them. But if I wronged an innocent person, take it out on me. Take it out on me. But then we get past the Selah, and it's all of a sudden, it's like all about, you know, God's retribution against the wicked, and the wicked have it coming to them. And right. It feels like almost like 2 different Psalms in its emotional tenor. So I did bring a comment about that from Rabbi David Levy, which is why I asked that we read his translation. So this is at the very bottom of the final page, page 13. Sorry, Richard Levy. I said David, but I meant Richard. Richard Levy, he writes, if after our initial reflection on verses 4 to 6, we feel an inner peace, a sense that though we are hardly perfect, we deserve to see ourselves as a just or righteous person, then we can proceed with the psalm. We may invoke verses 7 to 12 as a hymn of confidence that we are not defenseless, that we are in tune with the force of the Almighty protecting us, strengthening us against the inner tyrants of doubt and fear. So the first half of the psalm is about bringing up these inner tyrants of doubt and fear, and then coming to a sense of peace about them. Like, I'm sure I'm blameless. I'm sure I didn't mean to do any harm. And then the rest of it is a profound hymn of confidence that God will support our being in the right. Any other comments on this emotional shift? Alba?
It's like when a situation occurs and when all the dust settles, you notice that maybe you did something wrong. Not too sure, haven't had time to analyze it clearly, but maybe you did something wrong. And okay, I'm going to accept the, my punishment. I'm going to take it. If I'm wrong, okay, fine. I made a mistake and I deserve to be punished. But I got a pretty good idea that I didn't do too much wrong here. And that if I am really innocent of this and everyone's just like, there's a big old setup and someone's trying to, annoy me, then may all of the horrible things of the universe fall on your head. Because I don't need this I don't need this agony that you're trying to put on me. And so if there's if I'm pretty much 83.7% right and everyone else is just trying to goad me, I hope you all fall in a ditch and die. So that's how I feel this kind of shift, that moment when you do realize that you could have been wrong a little bit, but not completely. And that maybe there's some other powers behind the people that are trying to disturb your calm, that maybe they're more wrong in trying to disturb your calm than you were wrong in your decision in the beginning. And so at this point, it's like, what the hell, man? What are you trying to bug me for? And so that shift, I don't know if any of you have ever lived that shift. I've lived that shift. And so and that's what I get this feeling of. Maybe it's more like politicians, very often politicians, they've done the best they could with what they got, and then everyone comes down on them. And at that point, the politician is sort of like, well, I did the best I could, give me a break. And I don't know, that kind of a shift. Okay.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. All right, so let's look at the commentaries that suggest that it's Saul that this psalm is talking about. We can find those on, I think, the top of page 12, right underneath where it says, as far as I can tell, no verses from this psalm are used in Jewish liturgy. All right, so the Talmud Bavli says, the response to this admonishment is found in this verse, as it is written, Shigayon of David, which he sang to the Lord concerning the words of Cush the Benjaminite. Is Cush his name? Saul is his name. Rather, this is a designation that indicates, just as a Cushite, a native of the kingdom of Cush in eastern Africa, is distinguished by dark skin, so too Saul was distinguished by his actions, as he was absolutely righteous and performed many good deeds. Therefore, David uses the word shigayon as an allusion to the error, shagiyah, that he made when he sang a song of praise over Saul's downfall. So the song of praise over Saul's downfall is contained in the book of Samuel. When Saul dies, David sings a song. The song honors Saul, but also takes a few attacks at Saul. The most famous line of that song is "How the mighty have fallen." Ich naflu giborim. So and we do, but so here the Talmud imagines that David regrets having sung a song upon the hearing of the death and downfall of Saul, and this psalm is sort of a response to that. Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Weinreb comments, David's relationship with Saul was even more complicated than most love-hate relationships, right? He starts by saying, we've all experienced that concept of a love-hate relationship, and David's relationship with Saul was very complicated, right? Saul loved David, and Saul was David's father-in-law. And then Saul came to hate David, whom he feared as a rival for his throne. Rabbi Weinreb says, it's impossible to fight an enemy effectively when you have mixed feelings for him. What makes matters worse, how could David distinguish his own allies from those of Saul? For that, he had to rely upon God, the searcher of heart and mind, right? David is confident, has that sense of confidence in God's justice. All right, any thoughts on Saul? Yeah, I do think that paying attention to the superscriptions and trying to understand what at least the authors of the compilers of the Book of Psalms were trying to point us in the direction of does help, at least in some sense, with the understanding of the psalm. But I really do appreciate Rabbi Richard Levy's approach that the psalms are all of the enemies are internal rather than external, and try to figure out what is the internal enemy that this psalm in particular is talking about, right? It's about self-doubt. So we've got this self-doubt, fear, and anxiety, but specifically directed at the self. That's the enemy of this psalm. And then the psalm, it comes with a a strong sense of confidence in the poet's, the psalmist's sense of right. So I did bring a comment from Bachya ibn Pekuda from his book Duties of the Heart, which he was in 11th century Spain, and he's writing sort of a philosophical work on understanding sort of one of these early sort of self-help, not self-help, like trying to cultivate the right midot, character traits in your life. And he talks about cultivating forbearance and the ability to bear patiently words and deeds one hates. And he specifically focuses on this concept from verse 5 of the Psalm. Verse 5, let the enemy persecute my soul and take it. Yea, let him tread down my life upon the earth and lay mine honor in the dust. Selah, right? If I have rewarded evil unto him that was at peace with me. That's the KJV, the King James Version. So he says, if I repaid the one who did evil to me, or have plundered him who without cause was my enemy, and do not say, and he did to me, so I will do to him, and repay the man according to his deeds. And our sages taught, those who are insulted but do not retaliate, who hear themselves humiliated and do not respond, serve God with love and rejoice even in suffering. On them, the verse says in Shoftim, those that love him will be like the sun when it goes forth in its might. The sages refer to this as ma'avir al midotav, that letting offenses pass, trying to come with a sense of being forgiving. So this is, I think, a different approach to the emotional tenor of the psalm. Rather than a sense of confidence, this is a sense of forbearance, which I think, if you're thinking about what is the emotions of this psalm, I might not have thought of forbearance right away, which is why I brought this comment. Because I was like, oh, so interesting to think about this psalm as a sense of forbearance. But definitely, if you read those verses, verses 3, 4, and 5, there definitely is some sense of forbearance, some sense of, yeah, they might have done something wrong to me, but I wouldn't do anything wrong to them. I'm just going to, well, we might say in Christian parlance, to turn the other cheek. Although that phrase does come with its own sort of spiritual and emotional baggage. And I recently read a book that says that we don't really understand what that means. We got to go back to the New Testament, to the passages about Jesus. And then, well, yeah, I'm definitely going to bring some quotes from that book when we get to some of the Psalms that they deal directly. But it's the Bible with and Without Jesus by Mark Brettler and Amy Jill Levine, who also wrote the Jewish annotated New Testament. Anyway, the fascinating book, The Bible with and Without Jesus. And they do look at a couple of Psalms and the varying interpretations of those Psalms in Judaism and Christianity. When we get to those Psalms, I'm definitely going to bring that. All right, so I guess we'll close with looking at this issue of the comparison to childbirth and the pain of childbirth in verse 15. So let's go back and read verse 15. Let's specifically pick a reading that we haven't looked, translation that we haven't looked at. So here, this is the Evangelical Christian translation from James Hamilton from the Evangelical Bible Theology Commentary. And here's verse 15 only. Yeah, that's right. Behold, he writhes iniquity and gets pregnant. He goes into labor and gives birth to deception. So, and writhes here seems to have that very much intimate kind of sense of writhing. right? Here's another example. Lo, he travails with evil. He has conceived trouble and brought forth falsehood. Or here, look, one spawns wrongdoing, grows big with mischief, gives birth to lies. All right, so all of these verses have this sense of the way, the sort of inevitability of bad consequences that come from doing evil, right? I think that's just like pregnancy inevitably or leads to birth. I think that's sort of the image here. So too, certain kinds of conception of evil inevitably lead to bad consequences. Mishka.
This makes me think of the story of Eve, that she had violated God's commandment to not eat of the tree, and her punishment ultimately is to give birth in pain.
Right. I mean, definitely childbirth is painful, and the pain is definitely a part of this. The pain is definitely a part of the sense of this. So Radak, who I bring a lot of comments from Radak, because Radak's complete translation of the Psalms is available in translation in English on Safaria. And if I was going to write, like, there are other commentaries on Psalms, but many of them are in Hebrew. And so I have read them, but I would have to spend a lot of time translating. So I tend to bring Radak a lot because it's already available in translation. So Radak says, he compares the thoughts of his heart with conception and says their issuing in speech or conduct is like the pangs of a woman in childbirth. If so, the comparison is between speech and birth pains, between conduct and childbearing. And he says that he speaks evil because he has conceived it in his heart and brought it forth in his mouth for execution. And iniquity and mischief and falsehood all have one meaning. Though the words are different. So in other words, he's saying, this is these are all synonyms. Okay, and Robert Alter says, in the midst of the battle imagery, right, the bows and arrows and the spears and the fiery arrows, right, the actions of the wicked are likened to the birth process in order to stress the idea that there is a quasi-biological causality in which evil acts like seed quickening in the womb will inevitably lead to disastrous consequences. The nature of these consequences is spelled out in the next verse, which moves antithetically from womb to pit. One detects a satiric intention in comparing the fierce evildoer to a parturient woman, meaning a woman who is pregnant. I had to look up that word. I was like, wow, why wouldn't you just say pregnant? But anyway, I think what he's saying there, what Alter is saying is the poet is imagining the wicked evildoer, say one of Saul's right-hand men who has professed loyalty to David but is secretly plotting against him, right? That's the person that the psalm is talking about, right? That person is like a pregnant woman, right? The idea is to also attack that person's sense of manhood, right? That's what I think he's saying about the satiric intention in comparing the wicked, evil person, not just to use the violent military imagery, but also to use this childbirth imagery. All right, thoughts, reactions, comments? Esther, are you sharing a comment with us, or you just sharing a comment with the people you're with.
And here.
Yeah, Henry.
So I did have a question. You said, I hope we stay on because it keeps on freezing, that this particular psalm is not used in Jewish liturgy. Is it used in Christian liturgy?
Well, I don't know. James?
Thank you.
No, I can't remember any part of the liturgical year where this is used.
Yeah.
The way that
I love
first I
Chris
read
Banks.
through it, then I read through it again, then I read through it again. After 3 times of reading through it and nothing like singing with me of like, oh yes, that sounds so familiar. I do know our liturgy pretty well, but I then used Sepharia. Sepharia does intertextual connections really well. And so I went through every verse on Sepharia to see if there was any connections to liturgy, and there wasn't a single one, like not on any verse of the whole psalm. So I'm pretty confident that it's not in Jewish liturgy. And James doesn't remember it being in Christian liturgical tradition. So yeah, I think this is like one of those passed over psalms.
Thanks.
Yeah. All right. I want to thank everybody for engaging. We won't meet next Tuesday, but we will in 2 weeks. There is an opportunity right now if you signed up through the Masorti movement to hear a report from Israel from Tzipi Livni, the former justice minister. If you Google search Tzipi Livni Masorti movement, you should be able to find it and register for it. It's starting at 11, so it might be that it's closed out, but you can try. And I encourage you, if you can get to it, to go to that program, because I think it would be very interesting to hear Tzipi Livni's response to the current emphasis on judicial reforms that the government of Israel is trying to do right now. So thank you, everybody, and see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you.